This story isn't about revenge. It's about a moment most of us fear but rarely prepare for when family love suddenly comes with conditions. When you sit down thinking you're there to talk and realize the decision has already been made for you. Papers ready. Lawyers waiting. A quiet pressure to give up what was never meant to be taken. We've all felt that pull, haven't we? That knot in the chest when family stops feeling safe and starts feeling transactional. When saying no feels like betrayal even though something inside you knows it's the only honest answer left. That moment doesn't come with shouting or drama. It comes with silence, eye contact, and a pen placed exactly where your hand should be. This story begins at a so-called family meeting. No menu, no warmth, just an expectation that one person will fold for everyone else. What happens next isn't loud, but it changes everything. If you've ever wondered where loyalty ends and self-respect begins, stay with us. My name is Ledger Arkwright. I'm 32, and I never thought grief would come with contracts and threats. I'm about to tell you what happened after my dad died, and how the people who share my blood tried to make me sign my future away. But before I do, I want to know you're here with me and listening. Just comment listening, or tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if you can please hit subscribe. Not because I'm chasing numbers, but because this channel is the only place I can say the truth out loud without being interrupted, twisted, or silenced. If you've ever been pressured by family, or you've ever felt alone inside your own last name, staying with me might help you feel a little less alone too. My mom texted me like it was nothing. Just brunch, just us. Just a chance to talk about what's fair after my dad died. No tension, she promised. I stared at the message with that hollow, stunned part of my chest, still missing its weight, the part that used to be filled by my father being alive in the world. I almost didn't go. Not because I was afraid of a public restaurant, but because I was tired. Tired of her using grief as a doorway into my life again, tired of the way she kept saying family like it was a bill I owed. But the texts had been coming nonstop since the funeral, and I wanted it to end. I wanted to look her in the eye and find out whether she was capable of speaking to me like a mother instead of a negotiator. So I told myself what I always tell myself when something feels off: stay calm, stay polite, stay in public. I'm Ledger Arkwright. I'm 32. I work remote as a security engineer, which means my brain is trained to spot patterns and anomalies before anyone else even notices the blinking red light. And I still walked into that place believing the worst I'd have to endure was awkward small talk over overpriced eggs. South Park was busy and glossy in that particular Charlotte way, like the whole neighborhood was designed to keep you smiling while it emptied your wallet. The restaurant looked like it had been built for business deals, warm wood, soft music servers moving like they'd been trained not to make a sound. A hostess greeted me by name before I even said it, which should have been my first clue that my mother had done more than make a reservation. She led me past couples leaning over menus, past a group laughing too loudly at a corner table, and then deeper into the back where the sound softened and the air felt cooler. We stopped at a frosted glass door with a neat little sign that said, "Private." My throat tightened before she even touched the handle. When the door opened, the light hit me wrong, too bright, too clean, the kind of lighting that shows every imperfection and makes you feel like you're being inspected. The table inside wasn't set for brunch. There were no menus, no plates, no folded napkins. Just evenly spaced water glasses like a board meeting, and right in the center a thick stack of paperwork clipped into a perfect rectangle. On the top page in bold was my name. Next to it sat a pen lined up precisely for a right hand, like someone had staged the moment my signature would become inevitable. I didn't even have time to process that before I noticed him, a man in a suit, already seated, laptop open, eyes on me instead of a menu. His hand rested on the trackpad like he'd been waiting to start a presentation. My mom sat at the head of the table, posture, straight black blouse hair done like she was filming a day in my life reel. Bo sat beside her blazer that fit like confident smile, polite, but empty. Across from them, Tinsley and Jace were there, two quiet, stiff eyes lowered like they'd been instructed to play the part of innocent witnesses. Nobody looked hungry. Everybody looked ready. Ledger, my mom said, too warm, too rehearsed. You made it. She said it the way someone says thank you for showing up on time to a meeting that matters. The man in the suit stood halfway and offered his hand as if we were equals in a negotiation. Pierce Langford, he said. I'm assisting your family with some options regarding your father's estate. The word family landed like a trick, like we'd all lost the same thing, like they'd been sitting beside my dad in the hospital holding his hand, when the truth was my father died with my number in his recent calls and my mom's name in a history of arguments about money. I sat slowly because moving too fast felt like surrender. My eyes went to the top page again. The language was dense, legal, and deliberate. Words jumped out the way red flags do in security alerts: voluntary redistribution, irrevocable. I didn't have to read the whole thing to understand what it was. You don't put a pen on top of papers like that unless you expect someone to sign. Before you get upset, my mom said, leaning forward with that practiced, sympathetic expression she saves for other people. This is just to make sure everyone is provided for. Your father's will didn't consider the reality of the family. Things are different now. She gestured subtly toward Tinsley and Jace as if they were line items. Pierce slid the packet toward me the final inch like he was being courteous. This is a family settlement agreement, he said. It allows you to transfer a reasonable portion of the inheritance into a shared trust. It's the cleanest way to avoid complications. Reasonable. I looked down and found the number. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't a token amount meant to soothe feelings. It was a chunk, most of it packaged as a contribution, as if my father's life had been a potluck and I was expected to bring the main course. I didn't react. I didn't blow up. I didn't give them the satisfaction of watching grief turn into chaos. I asked one question slowly because slow questions make liars nervous. Who drafted this? Pierce didn't miss a beat. Our office prepared it at your mother's request. I asked another. And who decided that percentage? My mom answered instead of him, her voice soft but firm as if she were teaching a child what kindness looks like. Ledger College is expensive. Life is expensive. You're doing well. You work in tech. You understand how hard it is out there. This is about fairness. Fairness. The word she uses when she means control. I set the packet down gently like it was contaminated. I'm not signing anything today, I said. The air changed. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like someone lowered the thermostat. My mom's smile thinned into a line. Bo leaned back a fraction, shifting into deal mode. Pierce's voice changed, too still calm but sharper at the edges. Then we may be forced into a more complicated process, he said. Contesting delays legal fees. Court records are public. And frankly, conflict can have ripple effects on your financial future. Credit, lending. Your ability to move quickly with assets. We're trying to avoid that. My mom watched me like she was waiting for me to flinch at the word credit. You don't want this to get ugly, she added, and it almost sounded like a warning. I'm giving you a chance to show you care about this family. That sentence hit harder than the threats because it was the same sentence she'd used my whole life whenever I didn't do what made her look good. Think about the family. Translate it. Think about my image, my comfort, my new life, and how your boundaries inconvenience me. I looked around that table, my mother at the head like a judge, Bo measuring my reactions, Pierce ready to bill by the hour, Tinsley staring at the tablecloth like she'd been told not to engage, Jace pretending he was bored, but I could see the tension in his jaw. They weren't here for conversation. They were here to surround me until I felt small enough to sign. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out level. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I did what my job trained me to do when a system is under attack. I counted the threats. I let my gaze move slow and deliberate, like I was counting place settings. 4, I said. My mom frowned. What are you doing? 5. Bo's eyes narrowed. Ledger stopped playing games. 6. I finished meeting Pierce's eyes. You're a lot of people. The room went quiet in that way it gets when no one knows what the next move is. And that was the moment I took the rhythm back. I smiled not because I was amused, but because I could finally feel the floor under my feet again. I pulled my phone out, tapped a single word into a message that was already drafted, and set it face down beside the pen they'd laid out for me. "Funny thing is," I said, calm as glass, "I only brought one person too." A soft, precise knock hit the door a few seconds later. The hostess opened it just enough for a woman in a navy blazer to step inside, folder in hand, eyes steady. Rowan Kincaid, my father's attorney, the person he trusted to keep my mother from rewriting his life after he died. Rowan offered my mother a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Corinne Vale," she said, using her full name like a gavel. "I understand you wanted to discuss Ledger's inheritance." Pierce's face went stiff, like a script had been yanked out of his hands. Bo stopped shifting. My mother blinked once, then recovered because she always recovers. "Rowan," she said, too bright. "We're just having a family conversation." Rowan placed her folder on the table with controlled certainty. "A family conversation doesn't come with an irrevocable agreement and threats about credit," she said. "If you continue pressuring my client to sign documents under coercion, that will be documented accordingly." She looked directly at Pierce. "And if your office would like to propose something, you can do it through me, not through an ambush over brunch." My mother didn't argue. Not because she agreed, but because she understood the math of the room had changed. She stood chair-scraping softly, and for the first time that day, she didn't look wounded. She looked like someone who'd lost a bid. Bo rose with her tight-lipped. Tinsley and Jace followed, confused and quiet, like kids walking out of a meeting they didn't understand, but had been dragged into anyway. Pierce gathered his laptop without looking at me. My mom paused at the door and glanced back, eyes hard. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't say, "I love you." She didn't even say goodbye. She left like she was already planning her next move. I stayed behind long enough for my hands to stop shaking. Rowan didn't praise me. She didn't offer comfort. She spoke like she was closing a file. "You handled that exactly right," she said. "From now on, everything goes through me." I nodded, staring at the pen still lying there like a dare. Because I understood something in that moment with absolute clarity, my mother did not assemble a lawyer and a contract for a one-time attempt. If she couldn't take my future with a signature, she would try to take it another way. Rowan walked out with me into the softer light of the restaurant, and the noise of the main dining room hit my ears like life continuing without permission. People were laughing, forks clinked. Someone was celebrating a birthday at the bar. I stood there for a second with Rowan's words looping in my head, "Everything goes through me," and I realized how strange it was that I needed a lawyer to keep my own mother from touching my father's legacy. I didn't start out like this. I wasn't born suspicious. I wasn't a kid who thought in worst-case scenarios or saw traps in pretty invitations. That part of me was built slowly over years by watching two people I loved fight over what money meant and what family was supposed to be. When I was little, before the cracks widened, I thought my home was normal. We lived in a quiet stretch outside Charlotte, where the houses were close enough to hear lawnmowers on Saturday mornings, and far enough apart that nobody knew your business unless you told them. My dad, Miles, was a software engineer with the kind of dry humor that made you groan and laugh at the same time. He'd say things like, "I don't trust anyone who says a password out loud," and then wink like it was a joke, except it wasn't. He packed leftovers for lunch, drove the same reliable car until it practically begged for retirement, and treated paying off a credit card balance like a little monthly victory. On Fridays, he'd sit at the kitchen table with a cheap spiral notebook and a spreadsheet open on his laptop and call it our 5-minute check-in, like money was just another habit: brushing teeth, taking out trash, staying steady. He loved clarity. He loved numbers because numbers didn't flatter you. They didn't lie. He taught me that money isn't a personality. It's a tool. It buys options, not worth. It's supposed to protect your future, not impress strangers. My mom hated hearing that. Corinne didn't hate my dad, at least not at first, but she hated what his calm looked like in other people's eyes. She hated the way his comfort with enough made her feel like she was settling. She wanted the gated neighborhood, the new SUV, the vacations with sunrise photos and captions about gratitude. She talked about what we deserved more than what we could actually afford. I remember being 9 and watching her scroll through listings on her phone, her thumb flicking past kitchens that looked like TV sets. "We could have this," she'd say, like it was a promise the world owed her. My dad would glance over and ask gently, "Do we want it, or do we want people to see we have it?" She'd laugh too loudly and tell him he was being dramatic. And then later, after she thought I was asleep, I'd hear the sharp edges of their voices through the wall. The night everything truly split open, I was 16. It wasn't a screaming match. It was worse, quiet, tense final. My dad had printed bank statements and laid them out on the kitchen table with the same careful order he used when he arranged bills for payment. My mom had her iPad open to a Pinterest board labeled Dream Home, like she'd built a shrine to marble counters and backyard pools. The air smelled like dish soap and something burnt in the toaster. My dad pointed to a column of numbers and said, "We can't keep living like this. We're chasing an image we can't pay for." My mom didn't even look at the paper. She looked at him, eyes bright with anger that felt older than that night. "I'm tired of just getting by," she said. "I'm tired of watching everyone else upgrade while we pretend this is fine." My dad leaned back in his chair, exhausted in a way I'd never seen before, and said, "I'm tired of pretending we're rich when we're not. I'm tired of debt. I'm tired of spending tomorrow's peace for today's photo." My mom's voice turned colder. "So what, we're supposed to live small forever because you're scared?" And my dad said the line that stuck to me like a tattoo. "I'm not scared. I'm responsible." That argument wasn't about money. Not really. It was about values. It was about whether truth mattered when no one else was watching. It was about whether love was supposed to feel like pressure. A few months later, they divorced. My mom moved fast, like she'd been holding her breath, and finally got permission to exhale. She left the house and the neighborhood behind with a kind of efficiency that made it feel like I'd been living in a place she never intended to stay. I went with my dad. Not because I hated my mom, but because with him life felt honest. He rented a townhouse near Lake Norman where you could hear the wind move through the trees at night. It wasn't fancy, it didn't photograph well, but it felt like a home where your worth wasn't measured in upgrades. On Fridays, he let me choose dinner, sometimes pizza, sometimes takeout. Then we'd eat on the couch and watch something dumb on Netflix. He'd pause the show to explain things like a teacher who never made you feel stupid. "This is why we pay interest," he'd say, tapping his phone. "This is why credit scores matter. This is why you never sign something you didn't read, and you never raid something when someone is rushing you." He never turned me into his ally against my mother. He never asked me to pick sides emotionally. He just gave me tools. He taught me that boundaries aren't cruelty, they're protection. He'd sit on the edge of my bed sometimes when I couldn't sleep and tell me, "You don't owe anyone your future just because they share your last name." Back then it sounded dramatic, like something a movie dad would say to make a point. I didn't understand it was a warning. My mom rebuilt her life in South Park and Ballantine like she was staging a comeback. Within a year she was dating Beau, charming, smooth, always dressed like he was heading to a closing. He lived on handshakes and confidence, the kind of man who could turn any conversation into a pitch. When they got married, my mom's social media transformed. Backyard parties, wine tastings, weekend trips, captions about blessings and new beginnings. Tinsley and Jace came into the picture, and suddenly every post looked like an ad for a perfect life. Matching outfits, smiling faces, a version of family so polished it felt like a brand. I was technically still her son, but most days I felt like an extra chair at a table that had been redecorated without me. She didn't call to ask how school was going. She called to tell me what Tinsley won, what Jace was trying out for, how busy she was, how expensive everything had gotten. The only time my name became urgent was when money was involved: tuition braces, a car, some unexpected expense that always seemed to end with a suggestion that my dad should help more. My dad would come home from those conversations quieter, but he never let bitterness leak onto me. He'd make popcorn on the stove, turn on an old movie, and act like the world was still safe enough to be gentle. Still, I noticed things. I noticed the way my mother always framed help as obligation. I noticed the way Beau watched people like he was calculating what they were worth. I noticed how my mom talked about fairness like it meant everyone should get what she wanted, not what they'd earned. And I noticed too how my dad became more careful as I got older. Not paranoid, just deliberate. One afternoon my senior year, I came home early and saw him sliding a thick folder into a small safe in the closet. He shut it when he noticed me and smiled like it was nothing. "Just paperwork," he said. "Adult stuff." I shrugged because I trusted him. He'd always had insurance policies and organized files. It didn't feel ominous. It felt like my dad being my dad. The part I didn't know what I didn't understand until Rowan said it out loud after the funeral was that my father wasn't just organizing his life. He was preparing for the war that would happen after he was gone. Rowan told me later in that same crisp, professional tone she used in the restaurant that my dad updated his will more than once. He did it after the divorce, yes, but he kept doing it. He did it after my mom remarried. He did it after Bo became part of her life. He did it when I got my first job, when my address changed, when my financial independence grew. Each update was deliberate, a protective layer. And the reason wasn't abstract. It wasn't just in case. It was because my dad believed quietly, sadly, that my mother would come for whatever she could the moment he couldn't stand between us anymore. Hearing that made my stomach drop in a way grief hadn't managed to do by itself. Because it meant my dad saw the future clearly enough to fear it, and still he never poisoned me against her. He just prepared me. That's why I didn't sign. That's why I counted the people in that room instead of counting excuses. My mother didn't walk into my life with a new plan out of nowhere. She'd been building pressure for years, training herself to say family until it sounded like law. And now she'd escalated to lawyers and contracts in a private room under two bright lights. If my father had gone to this much trouble to shield me, it wasn't because he liked drama. It was because he recognized a pattern. The same pattern I was starting to see with painful clarity when my mom couldn't win with emotion, she went for control. And if she was willing to stage an ambush with legal paperwork, then the question wasn't whether she had a deeper plan than a signature. The question was how long I'd been on her target list without realizing it. The call came on a night that already felt wrong, the kind of Carolina rain that turns the streets into black glass and makes every headlight look like it's drifting. I was halfway through a late work ticket at my kitchen table, laptop open, mug cooling beside me, when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. For a second I stared at it like it was spam. My dad used to say if it matters, they'll leave a message. Then I answered anyway because grief rewires your instincts into something sharp and superstitious. The voice on the other end didn't give me time to brace. Highway patrol. An accident. A chain reaction on wet pavement. My father's name said out loud in a tone that meant official and final. I remember the strangest detail, my cursor still blinking in the same spot on my screen, patient like the world hadn't just split. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. It felt like someone reached behind my ribs and hit mute on the entire room. I heard the words, understood the sequence, and everything inside me went quiet, as if my body decided it would rather shut down than feel it. I drove through the rain without remembering, the drive hands locked on the wheel wipers, fighting like they were angry at the sky, my mind repeating one thought that made no sense but wouldn't stop. He was careful. He was always careful. My dad was the guy who double-checked seatbelts, who rerouted around traffic, who carried a charger in his glove box because dead phones create problems. And still the universe took him on a wet road like he was just another statistic. The funeral was exactly what he would have chosen if he could have written it like code. Small, clean, no spectacle. A modest church off a side street, the kind with scuffed pews and coffee that tastes like it's been reheated too many times. A few co-workers from his company, a couple neighbors from our old townhouse near Lake Norman, and me standing there trying to keep air moving in and out of my lungs. I watched people hug and murmur and drift, and all I could think was that my dad would have hated the fuss. Then my mom arrived, dressed like she was stepping into a scene. Black outfit, hair done, face set in that careful expression that reads as devastated from a distance. Bo stood at her side like a polished accessory, a hand hovering at her elbow, ready to look supportive when someone glanced their way. Behind them came Tinsley and Jace, quiet and tense, dressed like they were attending a school ceremony they didn't ask to be part of. My mom cried loudly, the kind of crying that makes strangers turn their heads. She hugged people I knew she hadn't spoken to in years. She kept saying he was such a good man, like the phrase would earn her a place in the story again. I stood near the urn and felt something sharp and ugly rise in my throat, not hatred exactly, but clarity. She didn't love him. She loved the life she wanted him to fund. After the service, while the last of the cars were pulling out and the air smelled like wet flowers and exhaust, a woman in a navy blazer approached me with the calm stride of someone who doesn't get rattled by emotion. Rowan Kincaid, my father's attorney. We sat outside on a metal bench near the church's small courtyard, rain misting the edges of everything, and she didn't waste time with soft language. "Your father was thorough," she said. "He updated his will multiple times. He anticipated pressure." She let that word hang for a beat, because we both knew where it was pointed. She explained probate in plain terms the way my dad would have explained a system the court validates the will oversees transfer of assets. Ensures challenges aren't just emotional tantrums dressed up as legal filings. If someone wanted to contest, they'd need real grounds, not vibes. Then she outlined what my dad left: the townhouse near Lake Norman, retirement accounts he'd rolled over carefully, a steady investment portfolio built for long-term stability, not bragging rights. No private jets, no headline numbers, but enough to give me a future with room to breathe. Hearing it didn't make me feel greedy. It made me feel mournful and weirdly proud, like my father had found a way to protect me even when he wasn't here to stand between me and my mother's definition of fairness. Rowan looked me straight in the eye and said, "Ledger, he wanted you to have control without interference." My phone buzzed while she was still talking, like the universe had timed it for emphasis. A text from my mom long enough to fill the screen without a single pause. Not one sentence asking if I was okay. Not one line acknowledging that I'd just buried the man who raised me. It was all logistics and morality wrapped together like a rope. "We need to talk like adults. Your father would want you to think about the family. We should handle his estate fairly." And then the line that made my stomach drop because it wasn't subtle at all. "Do you have a rough idea of what he left you?" I stared at it, thumb hovering, feeling my grief being measured like square footage. She was pricing my dad's absence. Rowan watched my face change and didn't even ask. She'd seen it before. I answered my mom politely anyway, because a part of me still clung to the fantasy that she might remember how to be my mother if I gave her enough room. I wrote that the process would go through probate, that my dad had legal representation, that we could talk when things were formally underway. She ignored the part about Rowan like it didn't exist. The next message came faster, pushing past my boundary like it was a suggestion. "Okay, but what kind of numbers are we talking about? Because we need to plan." When I didn't respond immediately, the guilt arrived right on schedule. She reminded me she'd taken care of me when I was a kid, as if feeding your child is a loan that comes due with interest. She talked about sacrifice, about how expensive my teenage years were, about Tinsley's college applications and Jace's future. She kept saying family, but she didn't mean me and her. She meant her new household, her curated life, and how my dad's careful planning could be repurposed into their safety net. I kept my replies short and factual because I could feel how badly she wanted me to get emotional. Emotion is messy. Emotion creates openings. My dad taught me that the moment money enters the room, people get reckless, and reckless people leave evidence. So I started saving everything. Screenshots, voicemails, timestamps. Not because I thought I'd need to build a case against my own mother, but because the pattern felt too familiar. She wasn't asking how to grieve. She was asking how to extract. The day probate paperwork started moving, her tone shifted again. The sweetness thinned out. She left a voicemail that began with "Honey, I'm just trying to help," and then slid into something sharper. "Lawyers are expensive, you know. This could drag on for years. You don't want court records. You don't want complications." And then she hit the pressure point she thought would make me fold credit. She said it like a weapon wrapped in concern. "Ledger, if things get messy, it can affect your credit, your ability to buy a home, your financial future. I'm looking out for you." It made me laugh once, a dry sound I didn't recognize as my own because it was so transparent. She didn't need me to be sad. She needed me to be scared. She wanted me to believe she could make my life hard enough that handing over my father's legacy would feel like relief. That night, back in my townhouse, the silence felt different, not peaceful, charged. I sat at the same kitchen table where I'd gotten the call about my dad, and I played her voicemail again, listening to the exact moment her voice shifted from mother to threat. I wrote down the date and time. I saved the audio file. I forwarded the screenshots and voicemails to Rowan with a message that was almost embarrassingly simple. "She's talking about my credit." Rowan replied the way she always did, not with emotion, but with a plan. "Do not share balances. Do not sign anything. Do not meet privately. If she wants to challenge anything, she can do it through formal channels. If she tries to pressure you outside of that document, and send it to me." She ended with a sentence that landed like a warning bell. "This is exactly why your father hired me." I stared at my phone after that, feeling a cold thread run through my grief. The family meeting in South Park hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been built step by step with texts that tested my boundaries, guilt that tested my spine, and threats that tested my nerve. If my mother was willing to talk about credit and complications before the ink on probate paperwork was even dry, then her plan was never just conversation. It was leverage. And if she couldn't get my signature, I couldn't stop thinking about what else she might try to get her hands on what my dad had put in my name. By the time I left that private room in South Park, the city looked too normal to match what had just happened. People were crossing the street with shopping bags. A valet jogged past with someone's keys. The sky was bright and indifferent. I sat in my car for a long moment with my hands on the steering wheel, feeling the delayed tremor in my fingers, not because I regretted saying no, but because I realized how cleanly my mother had staged it. The lighting, the paper stack, the pen angled for my right hand. The lawyer already seated like a trap had been sprung before I even entered the room. That wasn't a family conversation that got out of hand. That was a business plan. Rowan called while I was still in the parking garage, her voice steady and low. "Do not engage her directly," she said. "No explaining, no arguing, no defending yourself. Procedure only. Everything goes through me. And keep every single thing." I promised I would, and as I drove back toward Lake Norman, I watched my reflection flash in storefront windows and thought about my dad's warning. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're protection. The next morning, I woke up to an email that made my skin tighten. It wasn't from my mom. It wasn't a dramatic message dripping with guilt. It was on official letterhead, crisp fonts, polite language, subject line that tried to sound reasonable. "Final opportunity to resolve this privately." It came from Pierce Langford's office, or someone associated with him, and the tone was the kind that pretends it's offering you a favor while it corners you. The attachment wasn't titled Family Agreement anymore. That name had gotten exposed for what it was. Now it was labeled Proposed Settlement, as if changing the label could change the intent. The document was dressed up in calmer language, but the goal was identical: move a significant portion of my inheritance into a shared structure controlled by the people who had ambushed me. It was a new coat of paint on the same theft. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Rowan, and then I opened a blank spreadsheet because that's what my dad would have done. I built a timeline like I was tracking an intrusion. Date of the funeral. Date. Rowan explained probate. Date my mother's first numbers text. Dates of her guilt messages. Voicemails mentioning credit. Date of the South Park meeting. Now this letter. I added notes not just about what was said, but about how it landed, because I refused to let them rewrite my reactions later as instability. If my mother ever tried to paint me as paranoid, I wanted the record to show I wasn't spiraling. I was responding. 2 days later, something happened that didn't look like money on the surface, but felt like fingers probing a lock. I got a notification from a service I barely used, an old account tied to my phone number saying my address was being updated. Another alert said a password reset had been requested. It wasn't my bank. It wasn't my investment account. It was one of those secondary things most people ignore, the kind of account that still holds personal information and can be used as a stepping stone. I clicked into it and saw a security question pop up that made my stomach drop, the kind of question people answer when they're young and careless. Childhood street, first pet, high school mascot. Stuff that isn't secure when the person trying to get in has been watching your life for decades. I canceled the reset, immediately changed the password, and turned on every extra security option available. My hands were cold the entire time. It wasn't proof of who did it, but it was a signal. Someone wasn't just pressuring me to hand over assets. Someone was starting to test how close they could get to my identity. I called Rowan. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded sharper. "This is why I told you to document," she said. "If they can't move you emotionally, they'll try to move you financially, not by negotiation, by access." Rowan had me come into her office the next day. It wasn't a dramatic law firm with marble floors. It was practical, like her shelves of files, a clean desk, a sense that she measured everything. She laid out the strategy the way you lay out a map in a storm. We were going to keep building the record. Not just a pile of screenshots, but a coherent chain with dates and times. We were going to tighten security everywhere, not because we were panicking, but because if this escalated, the best defense would be proof that I acted responsibly the moment anomalies appeared. She also prepared me for the possibility my mother would try to file something, anything to slow probate or create noise around my assets. "They don't have strong ground," Rowan said, "but weak cases can still be used to drain time and energy." She paused, looking at me the way my dad used to when he was trying to make sure I truly understood. "Their real weapon is pressure. If you stay calm, they lose their leverage." That week, the pressure arrived from a new direction. My mom stopped messaging me directly for a few days, and I almost let myself hope the presence of Rowan had scared her into reality. Then my phone started buzzing with names I hadn't seen in months: a family friend, a cousin, someone my mom used to call her church sister. Each message had the same shape, the same breathless tone, like it had been dictated. "Your mom is devastated. Don't do this to her. She's just trying to keep the family together. Your dad wouldn't want all this conflict. Be the bigger person." The words were different, but the rhythm was identical, and that told me everything. She was building a ring of voices around me, trying to make me feel like the villain without her having to say it herself. She wanted me emotional. She wanted me isolated. She wanted me to snap so she could point and say, "See, he's unstable. He's cruel. He's unreasonable." I didn't respond. I took screenshots, saved the dates, and sent them to Rowan. Every time I ignored one of those messages, my chest tightened, because it's one thing to set a boundary with your mother. It's another to watch her recruit strangers to police your grief. And then the physical world started feeling slightly off in a way that was hard to explain without sounding crazy. Mail that usually arrived on a certain day didn't. A letter I was expecting from a financial institution showed up later than it should have. Once I checked my mailbox, and it was empty when it shouldn't have been, as if someone had gotten there first or redirected something I didn't know was in transit. I told myself not to leap to conclusions, but I couldn't ignore the pattern forming alongside the digital alerts. I started checking my account settings more often, looking for any changes to addresses, phone numbers, notification preferences. I called the post office to confirm my forwarding status. I enrolled in USPS Informed Delivery so I could see what was supposed to arrive. The first time the email showed a piece of mail that never appeared in my box that day, I felt that same cold thread again. Not certainty, suspicion with weight. Someone was paying attention to the channels information travels through. Paper and passwords are the same kind of door. One night I sat at my kitchen table with the spreadsheet open, timeline stretching across the screen like a slow-motion crash. Funeral. Probate explanation. Numbers texts, credit voicemails, South Park ambush, proposed settlement email, password reset attempt, third-party pressure messages, mail irregularities. It was too much to be random, and it was too organized to be pure emotion. I could hear my dad's voice in my head, calm and steady, like he was talking me through a problem set. When something matters, write it down. When someone wants to control you, they'll try to rush you. Don't rush. I called Rowan and told her I was done merely dodging. "I'm not going to argue with her," I said, "but I'm not going to be blind either." There was a pause, and then Rowan said, "Good." Then we moved from reacting to capturing. She told me to record anything unusual the moment it happened. Save logs, save headers, save the exact time. If they're going to keep testing the locks, she said, we're going to make sure the testing leaves fingerprints. When I hung up, the house was quiet in a way that felt like the moment before a storm breaks. I walked through the townhouse and checked the doors twice, even though I knew they were locked. I stood by the window and looked out at the streetlights, reflecting on wet pavement, thinking about how quickly my life had turned into a security problem I didn't ask for. My mother had tried to take my future with a pen in a private room. She'd failed. And now she was moving like someone who didn't believe no meant no. I went back to my laptop and tightened every setting I could find because I couldn't stop hearing Rowan's warning in the back of my mind. If they can't get your signature, they may try to get your access. And the moment that happens, it stops being a family fight and becomes something else entirely. The quiet that followed the South Park meeting felt almost convincing at first. For 3 days, my phone stayed clean. No long guilt-soaked texts, no voicemails with that sugary tone hiding a blade. No third-party concerned relatives telling me to be the bigger person. The silence didn't feel like peace, though. It felt like the moment a predator stops moving so you'll stop watching. I tried to live normally inside it anyway. I answered Slack messages, pushed code, joined stand-ups, ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter because sitting down at the table still made my chest tighten. I told myself maybe the presence of Rowan had finally forced my mom to accept reality. Maybe she'd realized the law wasn't something she could talk around. Maybe she'd decided the risk wasn't worth it. Then the doubt crept in, not because I was naive, but because grief makes you desperate for any version of normal. I started wondering if I'd overreacted, if I'd turned a messy family conversation into a war because I'd been raw. That's the hole they want you to fall into. That's the soft spot where you start second-guessing your own instincts, where you stop treating red flags like red flags and start calling them misunderstandings. The email hit on a Tuesday night a little after 10. Right when the house was at its quietest and my brain was at its most vulnerable. It looked exactly like the kind of message my bank sends when there's urgent account activity. Same logo, same color palette, same clean font, same subject line structure that made my eyes skim without thinking, action required, verify your account to avoid restrictions. My stomach tightened as if the words themselves could reach through the screen. The body text was short and neat, which made it more believable. It said my account required verification due to unusual activity. It said access could be limited if I didn't confirm within 24 hours. It included a big button that read, "Secure your account now." The language was calm, professional, almost helpful. It also hid every fear my mother had been planting for weeks. Complications, access, credit, future. I hovered over the button with my cursor, and for half a second I felt the urge to click just to make the anxiety stop. That's how these things work. They don't lure you with greed. They push you with panic. Something in me resisted at the last moment, not heroism, just training. I'm a security engineer. My entire job is refusing to trust what looks familiar. I moved the cursor off the button and hovered over the link. The URL popped up at the bottom of my screen and it was close. Too close. A domain that looked right at a glance but wasn't quite right if you stared at it like it was a suspicious log entry. One character off. One tiny deviation that most people would never notice. My skin went cold. This wasn't a random spam blast. This wasn't some overseas scammer guessing. Someone knew my bank. Someone knew my timing. Someone knew I'd been on edge about access and verification and financial complications. Someone had built a message designed for me. I didn't click. I didn't forward it to Rowan yet. First, I called my bank using the number on the back of my card, the number my dad drilled into me to use when anything smelled off. The representative picked up with a voice that sounded tired in that way. Customer service voices always do, and I kept my tone calm because calm gets you taken seriously. I asked if they'd sent an action-required email. I asked if there were any security alerts on my account. The rep paused, typed, and said, "We did not send an email like that." Then almost as an afterthought, she added, "But I do see a failed login attempt earlier today from an unrecognized device." My mouth went dry. "Earlier today," I repeated. She confirmed the time. My eyes went back to the email's timestamp. The message wasn't the beginning, it was a follow-up. Whoever did this had already tried the front door. When it didn't open, they sent a fake key and hoped I'd hand it to them myself. The rep walked me through immediate lockdown steps, and I did everything with the sharp focus of someone disarming a bomb. Reset password. Enable stronger two-factor authentication. Review recent devices. Terminate active sessions. Add an extra verbal passcode to my account so no one could call in and charm their way through a reset. I asked her to note the incident in the account record. I asked for confirmation numbers. I wrote everything down with timestamps because this wasn't just about security anymore. This was about building a trail that couldn't be argued with. When the call ended, I sat in the dark kitchen for a moment, listening to the refrigerator hum, feeling the slow realization settle into my bones. My mother and Beau didn't need to win a legal argument if they could get into the accounts and move money before anyone could stop them. Paperwork was one route. Access was another. I went into full barricade mode the way my dad trained me to, except now I wasn't protecting myself from strangers. I was protecting myself from the people who knew my childhood street name and my first pet, and the answers I'd put into security questions back when I didn't understand that familiarity is ammunition. I changed passwords across everything that mattered: email, banking, investment platforms, retirement logins, phone carrier, even the small accounts that could be used as stepping stones. Every password became long, unique, and built to be useless to anyone who knows me. I updated recovery emails and phone numbers. I replaced security question answers with nonsense strings that had nothing to do with my actual life. I turned on account alerts for every transaction, every login, every profile change. Then I froze my credit with the bureaus and set fraud alerts so no one could open new lines in my name without me knowing. While I worked, I documented every step, the exact time I changed each password, the confirmation screens, the reference numbers. I wasn't just locking doors, I was proving I locked them. Right when I finished the last credit freeze, my phone rang. An unknown number. The timing felt too perfect, like a hand waiting just outside a door. I let it go to voicemail, but it called again immediately. I answered on the second ring, keeping my voice flat. A man introduced himself as account security support and said he was calling to help me resolve unusual activity. The voice was smooth, rehearsed, confident in that way scammers always are. Then he said my full name. Then he said an old address I hadn't used in years. Then, as if to prove he was legitimate, he referenced my father by name like the information itself was a badge. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. That wasn't the bank. The bank doesn't call you and bring up your dead father. I didn't argue, I didn't accuse. I just said I'll call back through the official number and hung up. My hands shook after, not because I was scared of the stranger on the line, but because it meant someone was tracking my reaction time. They weren't just throwing bait. They were watching to see if I'd bite. I forwarded the phishing email to Rowan, headers included. I sent her the bank's confirmation number, the time of the failed login attempt, and a summary of the fake support call. She responded immediately with the same controlled urgency she'd used in South Park. Good. Now we take this out of the family arena and put it where it belongs. She told me to file a fraud report through the bank's official channel and to make a police report for attempted identity theft. Even if no money had moved, the attempt mattered. The pattern mattered. Then she said something that shifted the air in the room around me. Also, file with IC3. If this escalates, you want a federal paper trail. I'd heard of IC3 in passing, like something you read about when crypto gets stolen or people get scammed by strangers overseas. It sounded unreal to attach it to my own life, to say I was filing a complaint because my mother might be trying to fish her way into my accounts. But the unreal part was already my reality. So I did it. I filled out the form late at night, attaching screenshots describing the email, the attempted login, the call. I typed my mother's name in a field where most people type unknown suspect, and my stomach lurched. Once the reports were submitted, once the bank had logged the incident and the police had taken an initial statement, I sat back and realized something else with a sudden sharp clarity. The online doors weren't the only doors. My mailbox was a door. My front entry was a door. Any piece of mail with a code, any envelope with account info, any official probate document could be used as leverage. And I'd already noticed irregularities. That meant the physical world was part of this now. I ordered a Ring doorbell camera and a small security camera angled toward the mailboxes in the street. It felt dramatic, like something people do after a break-in, not after a family dispute. But this wasn't a dispute. This was someone trying to become me long enough to take what my dad left. When the boxes arrived, bright cardboard and cheerful branding, it almost made me angry how normal the packaging looked. Like security was a lifestyle accessory. I installed everything myself because it made me feel less helpless. I checked the angles 3 times. I tested the motion alerts. I watched the feed on my phone until I could see the mailbox area clearly, the curb, the stretch of road where a car could idle unnoticed. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body was exhausted, but my mind kept replaying the hovering moment over that "Secure Your Account Now" button. How close I'd been to handing them the key. I opened my laptop and posted an anonymized version of what was happening on a legal and personal finance forum. I changed names and locations, but I told the truth about the private room ambush, the pressure about credit, the phishing email, the failed login. The responses flooded in faster than I expected. People told me to stop thinking of it as family drama. People told me to keep everything in writing, to never meet alone, to treat it like an ongoing attempt at fraud. A few admitted they'd lived through the same thing when a parent died and money surfaced like blood and water. Reading strangers confirm what my gut already knew did something important to me. It snapped the last strand of doubt. I wasn't overreacting. I was reacting accurately. By the time I finally lay down, the cameras were installed, my accounts were locked down, my credit frozen, my reports filed, and my evidence folder organized like a case file. I stood at my window one last time, watching the streetlights shimmer on damp pavement, and whispered something that wasn't a prayer but sounded like one. If they come back, I'll see it. I didn't know how literal that would become. I didn't know they wouldn't come back alone. I didn't know they would show up together on an ordinary weekday at an ordinary hour and line up in real time with a bank notification like the world's ugliest synchronization. 2 weeks passed with nothing but normal alerts. Amazon packages, a neighbor walking their dog, the mail carrier pausing too long at the cluster of boxes, the kind of motion notifications that make you roll your eyes and then forget about them. My life started to reassemble itself into routines again. Stand-ups in the morning, quiet work blocks, a quick lunch eaten at my desk. I almost let myself believe the cameras were just another layer of protection I'd never have to rely on. The day everything snapped into place, I was in a Zoom stand-up with my team, listening to someone talk about a sprint deadline like the concept of deadlines still mattered more than grief and betrayal. My microphone was muted. My camera was on. I nodded at the right moments, playing the role of normal, because pretending to be normal is how you survive in the middle of chaos. Then my phone buzzed with a ring alert: motion detected. The thumbnail flashed on the screen and my stomach dropped before my brain fully caught up. A familiar shape. A vehicle I'd seen at my mother's house more times than I could count. Beau's SUV parked in a way that wasn't casual. Not pulled up to drop someone off. Not cruising past. Stopped. Idling. My pulse jumped so hard it felt like it hit my throat. I clicked the alert and turned my Zoom camera off, with one hand mumbling something about connection issues while my other hand opened the live feed. The angle from the street camera showed Beau in the driver's seat, laptop open on his knees, the glow throwing pale blue light across his face. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't checking directions. He was working. His fingers moved with the specific rhythm of someone typing deliberately, not scrolling. A second alert hit before I could even breathe. Motion detected near mailbox. I switched feeds and there she was. My mother. Standing by the mailbox cluster with her phone pressed to her ear head, turning slightly as if she were scanning for witnesses. She didn't walk toward my front door. She didn't ring the bell. She didn't wave at the camera even if she saw it. She stayed in that narrow space between plausible and suspicious, between just checking something and trying to take something. The scene felt unreal, like I was watching a show where the main character doesn't realize the villains are family. My chest tightened so hard I had to consciously pull in air. Then my banking app lit up with a push notification that made the entire situation lock into place like a snapped chain. Unrecognized device attempting to access your account. For a moment, the world narrowed to 3 images that didn't belong together and yet fit perfectly. My mother at the mailbox, Beau with a laptop in his idling SUV, and my bank telling me someone was trying to become me. I didn't move. I didn't run outside. I didn't confront them. My father didn't raise me to start shouting when I had a chance to collect proof. I hit screen record on my phone and let it run. I captured the live video feed. I captured the bank notification. I captured the time in the corner of the camera view. My hands were steady in a way that surprised me, like the part of me that usually shakes when things get emotional had stepped aside for the part that knows how evidence works. While the recording ran, I logged into my bank website through my secure device and pulled the access logs. There it was, stamped in cold, boring text: failed login attempt, unrecognized device time, and IP information. I refreshed once and watched the log update like a heartbeat. I glanced back at the live camera feed and watched Bo's head tilt slightly as if he'd just received some feedback on his screen. My mother shifted her weight by the mailbox, still talking into her phone, still scanning around. The alignment was so clean it made me feel sick. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't paranoia. This was coordination happening in daylight. I didn't stop recording until my mother finally walked away from the mailboxes and Bo's SUV rolled forward and disappeared around the corner. Only then did I realize my Zoom call was still open. I rejoined with my mic muted and stared at the screen while my coworkers talked about bugs and deliverables, my face numb, my body vibrating with adrenaline. When the stand-up ended, I didn't even close my laptop right away. I sat there and watched the saved clip replay, listening to the faint outdoor audio from the camera, watching my mother's small movements, watching Bo's posture, watching the timestamps tick. I pulled up the bank log again and compared the times side by side. Minute by minute it matched. So closely it stopped being coincidence and became the only thing that mattered. They had tried to access my account while they were physically outside my home, positioned to intercept mail or confirm details or simply keep pressure on me while the digital attempt happened. They could cry in court. They could say misunderstanding. They could say family. None of it changes a timestamp. I emailed Rowan everything in one message: the video files, the screenshots, the bank logs, the time comparison. I expected a text back. I expected a calm instruction. Instead, my phone rang within a minute. Rowan's voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. Not panicked, not emotional, just edged with the kind of certainty that comes when a line has been crossed. "Ledger," she said, "this is attempted identity theft. This is not an inheritance disagreement anymore." I swallowed hard, staring at the dark camera feed as if my mother might reappear. Rowan kept going, brisk and precise. She told me to file a supplemental police report immediately. She told me to update the IC3 complaint with the new evidence. She told me to request written confirmation from the bank's fraud department about the attempted access and the spoofed communication pattern. "You have what we needed," she said. "Hard proof, digital proof, video proof. They can't talk their way out of this." I felt something break in my chest, not a sob, not even sadness, more like the final snap of a rope that had been fraying for years. Because the truth I'd been avoiding was now unavoidable. My mother had chosen this. She could have been grieving my dad like a human being. She could have been building a relationship with me that didn't involve paperwork and threats. She could have backed off after South Park. Instead, she stood outside my home while her husband tried to get into my accounts. Biology doesn't force anyone to do that. Choice does. I called the non-emergency police line with my hands still cold, and explained as calmly as I could that I had video evidence of coordinated behavior outside my residence coinciding with an attempted unauthorized login to my financial accounts. Saying those words out loud felt like stepping into a different life, one where I was no longer the son trying to keep things quiet and respectable, but the victim of a crime trying to keep his name from being stolen. The officer took the information, asked for the files, gave me a report number. When I hung up, I updated IC3 with the attachments and the timeline Rowan had helped me build. Each click felt heavy. Each upload felt like a door closing behind me. That evening, the house was quiet again. The cameras showed nothing but the street and the mailboxes and the ordinary world continuing as if it hadn't just hosted a betrayal. I sat at my kitchen table and watched the live feed anyway, not because I expected them to come back immediately, but because I needed to feel like I had eyes on my own life. I thought about the private room in South Park, the pen angled for my hand, my mother's voice warning about credit, The phishing email that looked exactly like the bank. The fake support call that knew my father's name, and now this, my mother, at the mailbox while Bo typed. It wasn't a series of separate incidents. It was a single plan unfolding across different doors. Paper, emotion, social pressure, digital access, physical proximity. And now the plan had collided with evidence. Rowan called once more before the night ended, her tone back to controlled but firm. She said we were going to pursue a protective order. She said we were going to coordinate with the bank's legal and fraud teams. She said if prosecutors wanted to move forward, we would be ready. Next time, she told me, you're not going to watch them through a camera. You're going to watch them explain themselves under oath. I stared at the dark window over my sink, at my own reflection, faintly layered over the quiet street outside, and I understood something that made my stomach twist and my spine straighten at the same time. This was no longer a family problem that could be handled with boundaries and silence. This was a case. And the next stage of my life was going to be lit by courtroom lights, where every word for the family would have to stand beside a timestamp that didn't care who gave birth to me. I thought I was ready for the courthouse because I'd already lived the worst parts in private. I was wrong. The Mecklenburg County Courthouse in uptown Charlotte has a way of shrinking you the moment you walk in. Dark wood everywhere. The air heavy, like it's holding every story it has ever heard. I arrived early, coffee already cold in my hand, my body doing that quiet shake you get when adrenaline has nowhere to go. I sat beside Rowan at the plaintiff's table and stared at the blank screen mounted on the wall. I knew what would play there. I just hadn't prepared myself for the fact that my life was about to run like a presentation, one timestamp at a time, and that the people who raised me would be sitting a few feet away pretending this was all a misunderstanding. My mother came in with a different lawyer than the one who'd waited for me in that glass-walled room in South Park. Older, grayer. Someone with the look of credibility she thought might calm the room. Bo followed shoulders, tight eyes already scanning exits like he was back in sales mode, calculating losses. When we all stood for the judge, my legs felt hollow, but I stayed upright. I kept hearing my father's voice in my head, steady as ever, facts, don't flinch. The defense opened first, and they didn't go where I expected. They didn't deny the emails. They didn't deny the logs. Instead, they talked about me, about grief, about how losing a parent can destabilize a person. They painted me as a son consumed by resentment from an old divorce, a man projecting hostility onto a mother who only wanted to help. They implied I'd connected unrelated dots because I wanted someone to blame. I felt my jaw tighten, not because the words hurt, but because I recognized the strategy. They weren't trying to win on evidence. They were trying to win on how I felt to the room. If they could make me look volatile, they could make every timestamp feel suspicious by association. Rowan stood and didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue emotion with emotion. She asked the court to focus on a timeline. Dates. Times. Actions. She laid out the sequence like a clean report, the private room meeting with documents prepared in advance, the messages warning about credit and complications, the phishing email, the confirmed attempt to access my account, the security logs, the video. Grief does not generate IP addresses, she said calmly. Grief does not create spoofed domains. Grief does not produce synchronized physical presence and digital access attempts. She asked the court to look at the screen. The bank's fraud specialist testified next, and his tone was clinical in a way that cut through everything. He explained the failed login attempts, the device mismatched the IP data. He confirmed in writing that the email I'd received did not originate from the bank's system and that the domain was intentionally designed to mimic theirs. He explained how phishing works, how it preys on stress, how it escalates after initial access attempts fail. Listening to him was surreal. This was my life he was describing, but he talked about it like a math problem with one correct answer. When the defense tried to frame the email as coincidence, he shut it down with a single sentence. This was targeted. Then the video played. First, the mailbox feed. My mother on the screen, phone to her ear, eyes darting like she was waiting for a cue. Then the street angle cut in Bo in his SUV with a laptop open, blue light painting his face. The investigator placed the bank log beside the video. The timestamps aligned so tightly it made my stomach drop all over again. I watched my mother on that screen and felt something crack inside me that no verdict could fix. Not because she wanted money, because she stood there and chose to become a stranger to me while wearing my last name. The defense tried to recover by offering an explanation that sounded helpful on its surface. They claimed Beau had attempted to access an old account from the marriage years trying to assist me with paperwork. Rowan didn't even let the thought finish breathing. She asked for records. She established that no joint account existed, that probate had transferred ownership cleanly, that there was no authorization. And then she delivered the quiet blow by offering that explanation the defense had admitted an attempt to log in. They weren't arguing whether it happened anymore. They were arguing intent. Rowan asked a simple question that echoed through the room. If the intent was help, why the fake email, why the mailbox, why the timing, why not a call in daylight with consent? There was no answer that fit. She played my mother's voicemails next, the ones about credit, about accounts becoming complicated, about how I'd regret letting things drag on. Hearing them in court stripped of family context turned my stomach. They sounded exactly like what they were: pressure. The investigator added one more detail that made the room go still. There had been another failed attempt days earlier, lining up with a message my mother sent warning me not to be difficult. A pattern, not an accident. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't perform. I didn't cry. I spoke the way my father taught me to document problems. I described the South Park meeting, the paper stack, the pen placed for my hand, the warnings about my future. I described how I spotted the email, how close I came to clicking, how I called the number on my card, how I froze my credit and installed cameras because I was trying to protect the last thing my father left me. I described the moment I saw the camera feeds and the bank alert at the same time. I said the part that mattered most to me out loud. It felt like someone was trying to step into my name and wear it long enough to erase me. The judge didn't dramatize the ruling. He didn't need to. He stated that the behavior demonstrated intent to access financial accounts through deceptive means, that it went beyond family dispute, that the evidence was consistent and corroborated. The penalties followed in a steady list: fines, restitution for legal costs, probation with financial monitoring, a no-contact order barring them from reaching me, my home, or my workplace for years. Beau's actions were referred to the appropriate licensing authority. It wasn't cinematic. It was heavier than that. It was real. In the hallway afterward, my mother didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She looked tired, like someone who'd lost a deal she'd already spent. Beau stared at the floor. Rowan leaned close and said, "They can't touch you anymore." I nodded, but the victory tasted like ash. Winning didn't bring relief. It brought clarity, and clarity hurts. The first morning after everything ended, I woke up and realized I hadn't checked my phone in panic. The cameras showed nothing but a delivery truck and a neighbor jogging past. The silence felt unfamiliar, almost boring. I learned quickly that safety is quiet, and quiet can feel strange when you've been braced for impact for months. The consequences for my mother and Beau rippled outward in predictable ways. Fines drained their accounts. Legal costs forced them to cut back hard. Beau's professional reputation took a hit that no polished smile could repair. Deals dried up. My mother's social media shifted tone overnight from curated celebration to vague quotes about resilience and starting over. She never mentioned me. She couldn't. The order made sure of that, and shame finished the job. I met Rowan not to defend anymore, but to build. We reorganized everything the way my father would have liked: clear accounts, emergency fund, diversified investments, regular security reviews. We set reminders to audit passwords and alerts. I named folders the way my dad did: boring and precise, because clarity is kindness to your future self. I also started therapy. Not because the court told me to, but because winning didn't heal the part of me that had to accept what my mother chose. I said the sentence out loud that once felt impossible: my mother tried to take my inheritance by impersonating me. Saying it didn't destroy me. It freed me from wondering if I'd imagined it. I learned to separate biology from behavior, to stop confusing shared blood with shared values. I used a small portion of the restitution to support organizations that help victims of identity theft and financial abuse. I didn't post about it. I didn't announce it. I filed the confirmation email in a folder called Miles Would Approve, and that was enough. Tinsley and Jace never reached out. I didn't push. I left the door unlocked in theory, but closed in practice. If they ever want the truth when they're older, they'll find me. Until then, boundaries stand. My father's real legacy wasn't the townhouse or the accounts. It was the discipline to read documents like code, to store evidence, to recognize when the word family is being used as leverage. I stand in my quiet house now, looking out toward the water near Lake Norman, and choose peace the way you choose any serious thing in life, deliberately. I didn't win by hurting my mother. I won by stopping the harm. And every time the cameras stay quiet, I hear my father teaching me one last lesson. Peace is something you protect even when the threat wears your last name. When the noise finally settles, what stays with me isn't the courtroom or the paperwork. It's the quiet that comes after. The kind of quiet where you realize that some victories don't feel like celebration, they feel like space. Space to breathe. Space to stop bracing. Space to admit that loving people doesn't always mean letting them decide your future. Sometimes it just means understanding where your responsibility ends and where your own life begins. We don't talk enough about that line. The one between compassion and self-erasure. But many of us have stood right on it, unsure which way to lean. What I learned is simple, but it took years to understand. We can hold empathy without surrendering ourselves. We can acknowledge pain, ours and theirs, without turning it into permission. And we can walk away from something broken without turning our backs on kindness. Not every ending needs blame to make sense. Some endings are just the moment we finally choose to protect what's left of us quietly without applause. If you're still here with me, thank you for listening all the way through. Truly. And if this story stirred something in you, maybe a memory, maybe a question you've never said out loud, you don't have to carry it alone. If you feel like it, you're welcome to leave a few lines in the comments. Sometimes writing it down is the first gentle step. And if you'd like to stay to be part of a space where stories are shared with care and without judgment, you can subscribe and join us here. We're just people listening to one another, one story at a time. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you again soon.